every day of the pandemic is a risk. Every day that we welcome back Australians into our country, as is their right. If you're an Australian citizen, you're by law and by compassionate grounds, you're welcome back to Australia. That's always a threat because we know the virus is particularly virulent now. The new strains are more contagious, and we also know infection rates in some places like the UK, the US and Europe are the highest they've ever been since the beginning of the pandemic. So the risk is always there. Every day of the pandemic is a risk. We're always exposed, but that's why New South Wales continues to adjust our settings. We continue to get the best advice possible and move forward. And as a government, we've been very flexible and adaptable. We've moved as the virus has changed, as we've learnt more. So, for example, last year was a very disruptive school year. We didn't understand as much about the virus as we do now, but some of the research we did on the virus in young people in particular is some of the best research that's been done anywhere in the world. So we can move forward with confidence with schools this year, confident that there'll be less disruption, and confident that we know much more than we did a year ago.
Are you worried, though, that there could be people anywhere in New South Wales that have this highly...
I worry every day, and the reason why today, as you know, in Greater Sydney we've eased some restrictions but not all of them, because we want to be confident that we haven't missed any chains of transmission that have been bubbling along in the community. So every day of the pandemic worries me, but we're in a very good position, and I'm grateful that the community has taken the advice provided by the government through the health experts. We base everything in New South Wales on the science and the data, and I'm just so grateful our community continues to work together to not only keep the virus at bay, but to keep the economy going, to keep jobs going, to keep businesses going, especially here in the regions.
So can I ask a couple of questions, please?
Yeah.
So the Queensland Premier has called for JobKeeper to be extended to the tourism industry. I know the Treasurer has suggested that is making taxpayers bankroll the border closure. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, the whole point that New South Wales has been so strong in keeping borders open within Australia is to prevent exactly what the Queensland Premier is now complaining about. When you unnecessarily close state borders, you lose jobs, you create hardship, you impact people's mental health and well-being. There is no reason why certain premiers move too quickly in shutting out New South Wales. There is nowhere in the state that's a hotspot, and even if there was, why should people from other parts of the state be prevented from moving freely? Now, she is now the victim of a policy that she put in place herself. And all I say is we need to think about these issues. We need to think about compassion. We need to think about jobs, and we need to think about freedoms as Australians. Because yes, I completely support having strong borders to Australia. But as for all of us within Australia, we're all Australians and we should be moving around freely within our country. Think about the jobs in tourism, the airline industry, hospitality, on compassionate grounds. Some families weren't even able to reunite over Christmas and New Year's. Every time you make a decision, and I know the Deputy Premier and I always really think hard before we make a decision because it weighs heavy on us. A decision you take can impact someone's livelihood, it can impact their health, it can impact their mental health and well-being, and that's why in New South Wales we like to find that balance between keeping the virus at bay but also keeping the economy going and keeping our citizens moving freely, and I wish other states would consider that approach as well.
The 11 sites that have been chosen or released by New South Wales Health for vaccines to be rolled out, what was the decision behind?
Oh, can I please say at the outset that obviously all states will be working with the federal government who's responsible for the vaccine rollout. So what you've seen today is an indication of some of the planning work that's going out, but obviously we'll wait to see the advice the federal government gives us on when the vaccine will be available and how many doses will be available and to whom it should go to. So we're still working through those issues. Obviously New South Wales, as all the states are, is doing its own planning to support the federal government's efforts, but we are still awaiting obviously details from the federal government on how and when it will be rolled out.
Here in New England there's 150,000 people, or upwards of that alone. That's not taking into account Narrabri and those regional communities. the closest place for them is 3 hours.
Well, but that's why I want to stress that what you've read about today is just preliminary planning. It is not the final planning. We're still waiting for the federal government to come back to us on their plans. But I can say, and the Deputy Premier and I sit on the Crisis Cabinet Committee, which looks after these COVID issues, and we've already started discussing how we would get the vaccine out to very regional communities, very remote communities, and that's high up on our list in New South Wales. But we're still, I should say, we're still going through that planning process. Nothing is final, and it will depend a lot on the advice the federal government gives us as to what is New South Wales' share in terms of the vaccine, but also the categories of people who will be receiving it first. And clearly people working on the front line with the virus and those most vulnerable will be in the queue first. So once we get that confirmation, we'll be able to then advise the community on all that. But please be assured that no matter where you live in New South Wales, once the vaccine is available, if you want it, we'll make sure, obviously through the federal government, that you'll have access to it.
If you other residents are travelling sort of 3 hours or more to go and get a vaccine, if that's the way it pans out, do you think that's appropriate? Do you think that's fair?
Well, I think that question's a bit unfair because I wouldn't make that assumption.
The plan's already out
No, but I've just said, no, I've just said that plan is very preliminary. We're still awaiting advice from the Commonwealth on timing of the vaccine, how and when it will be rolled out, and also where it can be rolled out. So the planning isn't finalised because we don't have all the details. What you've seen are just initial contingencies, and we'll await the federal government's advice on how to roll that out.
Last question. Travel 3 hours for a vaccine?
I've already answered that question.
So they shouldn't?
Last question.
I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Anti-mask protests held. What would you say to anyone that's sort of saying corona's fine?
Look, whilst people are entitled to their opinion, I would ask that where COVID is concerned, that people look at the facts. I mean, it's just horrendous, the number of people who've died from COVID around the world, the number of people whose lives have changed forever. And I think what people tend to forget is even if you do have the virus and you recover, some people's lives will never be the same. And that's why we take such a strong position in Australia and in New South Wales in preventing people from getting the virus. And yes, it particularly has a detrimental impact on older Australians, but people of any age group can have an adverse impact. And we've seen many young people succumb and develop lifelong conditions. So I would say to everybody who has an alternate view, please look at the facts. It is serious, and please accept the health advice provided because that will save lives. And you're entitled to your opinion, but don't impact the safety of others because so many people in the community are at risk if we don't follow the health advice.
I just have one question for Mr. Barilaro. Mr. Barilaro,